will be recorded, and we'll give you some more details as to how you can have access to that information as we move along. Once again, I want to start off by saying thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to engage with us. Today's session of Buried in Treasure, Help for Compulsive Acquiring, Saving, and Hoarding is a learning community. And for those who may not be familiar with learning community, we'll talk some more about what that looks like. But as a general sense of definition, it really speaks to an opportunity to engage collectively, share information, really do collective inquiry and collective learning as we all share our individual and collective experience, with the hope that the outcome is certainly a greater sense of awareness, competence about the knowledge, skills, and resources that are evidence-based and designed to really support people who are challenged by hoarding behaviors. So that's the outcome, that's the goal, that's the purpose. We'll speak some more about what that looks like specifically to you. But once again, welcome officially, and I'm always delighted to engage with the folks of Washington State. I had the privilege last year to visit Washington State, and as advertised, it's a phenomenal state. I love the terrain, I love the weather, and so on and so forth. So you have a fan. So let's talk some more about who I am. I am Earl Leach, for those who are unfamiliar. I am a senior training and consultation specialist with the University of Rutgers here in New Jersey. We are contracted by DBHR to provide the specific training opportunities, as well as other trainings that we provide for FCS across Washington. So we are very familiar with the services and supports and practices and values of Washington State DBHR. So hope that that shines through in our engagement and we do justice to those values and principles. So welcome. Today's webinar is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Health Care Authority. And the expectation is it's an interactive training.
I'm unable to make the video work for this time, but I can see you.
Okay, what I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, is if we're not thinking directly, if you can mute, just to make sure that we provide that kind of opportunity for folks to engage. So thank you. As I was saying, this is an interactive training and we encourage you to ask questions and participate throughout the session. So you obviously have the opportunity to unmute and share directly, or you can do so in the chat. The slides, as well as the link and the recording of this webinar, will be sent to you, and we'll talk some more about how you can access that information. A note about artificial intelligence, and that's important to note. The use of automated note-taking bots or similar tools during Washington's FCS events or meetings require prior authorization. So we really ask if you're going to use that to get prior authorization from your specific FCS authority before we move forward in that direction. If there are any questions just regarding that, feel free to reach out. So specifically to the material for today, take note that the materials and recordings will no longer be emailed to participants as we did in the past. It will be uploaded to the chat during today's session. So during today's session, I will upload a link to the PDF copy of the entire presentation. As well as the recording of today's session will be available to you on HCS FCS channel, the Foundation Community Supports YouTube channel, approximately 2 weeks after the session. So that should be there as well for you. We hope that you make the most of that. And my oversight, I want to also inform you that I'll be joined by my colleague, Crystal Sosha, who will be providing technical support and is always a treasured colleague of mine. So we are together providing you the best of ourselves here. So what's the learning community schedule like? For those who are, you may have seen in your initial registration, the learning community meeting schedule really goes from today in particular, this month, right through to to June of next year. So it's an entire, what is that, 11 or 12 sessions. Typically, the Buried in Treasure Learning community is a 12-month kind of engagement. So there is a constant monthly meeting, and we have specific, I don't like to use the term homework, but oftentimes it's an opportunity for practice the skills and come back and provide feedback each month. So it's a really comprehensive learning opportunity, and it's not just a matter of understanding the theories and values and concepts and practices of how we address hoarding, but it's an opportunity for you to take those skills directly into your daily practice, put them into action, and then come back and provide feedback so you have an ongoing kind of education and practical experience with the material. So it's really, like I said, a learning opportunity and a learning community where you put a lot of this into practice, and you certainly can provide feedback to the general cohort and directly to me. I think what's critical and important is that we want you to question things. We want you to always be inquisitive, to continuously learn and grow and try your very best to kind of engage. And as well, be unafraid to share your feedback as to how things have gone. So I want to make it very clear that I will not in any way be concerned or taken it personally if you came back and said, Earl, I tried this and it doesn't work. Let's talk about an alternative approach. So this is a really perpetual learning opportunity. There's no perfect way of doing this. It's a continuous growth opportunity. And I want to make sure that I set that kind of humble perspective up front. Everyone clear on that? It's a safe space. It's an opportunity to learn and grow. There's no perfect way of doing this. We all can learn, and hopefully we'll gather as much information from each other as we can. Bravo. So as we go through each chapter, and this is focused on the reference Buried in Treasure, we'll talk some more about what that looks like. And if you have the opportunity to acquire that particular book or reference, it will provide even a greater guide. So today we'll talk specifically about the introduction to hoarding as to what it is, what it looks like, what is the foundational concept of where there's causation or impact. We'll take a look at that, as well as really look at just an introduction generally to the learning community and the reference we'll be using. And as we go through chapters, we'll talk about how we perceive, how we see hoarding being a problem, how it impacts people's daily living, the quality of life, and so on and so forth. And we'll take it right through to how do we motivate people to make those changes that are going to positively impact their efforts as they try to address their hoarding concern, and really taking on our own perspective of how we see things and how the people that we serve may actually be reconciling with challenges and concerns. So it's a really comprehensive look at not just the theory and concepts, but at the practice and the impact that it may have in supporting people who are challenged by hoarding behaviors. So before we jump further, let me get to know you. I've introduced myself. I certainly would like to get to know you. What I'm going to ask is if you take the opportunity, I have a poll that I would certainly like you to just provide some feedback as to where you are in Washington, what kind of work you do, and how that relates to your interest in Buried in Treasure. So take a quick minute or so and just provide us with some feedback if you can. All right, I see folks from Eastern Washington. Claire, that's fine. If you want to put it in the chat, that's fine. Seattle. Okay. So give folks another 30 seconds or so to provide us some feedback, and then we'll take a look at the results to get a sense as to who you are, where you're from, what you expect of this learning opportunity, and how you see it being integrated into your daily practice and impacting your ability to serve the people that you serve. All right, so another 5 seconds, and then we'll get right into really taking a look at who we're sharing our time with today and why. All right, so the first question was, what region of Washington State do you work in? And wow, there is a very diverse representation here. We have folks from North Puget Sound. Is that correct? I always have to make sure I do my best to try to pronounce that. There's folks from South Puget Sound, even the peninsula and coastal region have representation. Hello and kudos to you. Northeast, Northwest, Southwest. So we have really diverse representation, and people are providing that information in the chat as well. I see certainly folks from Seattle and Tacoma and all over Washington. Thank you for making the effort to engage with us. What type of agency do you work for? Just around 27% of you said mental health. A greater majority of folks are in housing. I'm surprised. That kind of surprised me that we don't have similar representation in employment, but that's fine. For those who are here, we treasure you. You have similar values. It's not a race. What motivated you to join Buried and Treasured Learning Community? And a great, more exactly 3/4 of you that presented it indicated that you work with consumers whose hoarding caused significant distress and impairment. So it appears as though most of you are here because you want to know, or you want to sharpen those tools or expand your toolkit in working with the people that are challenged by hoarding behaviors. We have some representation as well from family and friends who struggle with hoarding problems, and people who want to be of great support. And generally learning about addressing problems from a professional development standpoint. Question is, what do you hope to improve by attending this community? Knowledge of hoarding, disorder, skills, resources, and supports. Fantastic. Even better than I anticipated. Well, welcome and thank you for being here. We hope and we will strive to provide as much information, knowledge, skills, and resource that will enhance or hopefully expand your toolkit to positively impact the people you work with, so that you can support them in their move towards at least addressing hoarding and hopefully abating it altogether and getting back to living their lives as magnanimously, as self-directed as possible. So thank you. So about this Buried in Treasure learning community, the idea is this is a self-help guide. It really provides insight and behavior change. We're talking about people with hoarding disorder, behavior problems. And oftentimes, as we saw indicated in the introduction, people have loved ones who hoard, and most of you are service providers as well. So oftentimes, hoarding as a challenge is one of probably the most expansive impacting condition, right? In many instances, you are oftentimes faced with folks who hoard as the people you serve, sometimes people who you love, and oftentimes, wink, wink, sometimes we are the people who are hedging towards that kind of challenge or immersed in it. And we want to make sure that we are garnering as much knowledge and skills and resources we can to make some changes in our own lives. And kudos to you for taking the leap, taking that opportunity. And thank you very much. So there's supports even beyond the buried in treasure learning community. As we go through this process, we'll talk a lot about how therapy may be actually integrated and accessed to further support folks. And we talk about looking at it from a CBT perspective. We have some CBT for hoarding behaviors. We have some professional organizations that we can access as well. And certainly there's a tremendous amount of reference and workbooks that we'll be using. I'll be connecting you, linking you to as well. So this is all about really expanding on your knowledge, skills, and resources to aid you in your efforts to support loved ones, clients, or yourself as you pursue really making a dent in the challenge of hoarding. So, how many of you, and just give me a yes or no if you can, have heard of Buried in Treasure, have potentially read the text, or have spoken to someone who attended the Buried in Treasure community before? Give me some feedback so we have a sense as to what's your relationship to Buried in Treasure. Ah, lovely. Someone said read it. And we have folks who attended the last session. And the most delightful folks are the people who have, this is their first exposure. Let's talk about it. And some folks who missed or weren't able to attend last year, here's a great opportunity. We're happy to have you. So, Buried in Treasure is a really profound and significant text that will be used as kind of the core flagship guidance of what we do today. Buried in Treasure Help for Compulsive Acquiring, Saving, and Hoarding is a text that was written by Tolin Sacchetti and Frost in 2013. And that second edition really lends a great deal of credence and information to those who are challenged by hoarding. It was really written for people who are suffering from hoarding, people whose loved ones hoard, and professionals who support and provide services to folks who hoard as well. The great thing about this particular text is that it really outlines a scientific base, an effective program for helping those with hoarding disorder. So it's really supported by evidence-based approaches and strategies, and it's done a lot of work in really looking at the complexity of the challenge of hoarding, as well as how much of a really diverse approach you have to take to really support people. So it's a comprehensive read. It really provides a simple to read, instructive, concrete guide as to how you may approach it initially and concretely over time. So we'll be delving in a lot into the text. And the hope is you will leave each of these sessions with a tangible takeaway that hopefully informs and supports your efforts as you continue to do the great work you're doing in supporting people who hoard. So this learning community will use that particular text and will provide a lot of resources for you to provide to your consumers as well. And we hope that this serves as a resource group for you can come back and kind of touch base and explore things, discuss things, and really get some good touchstone opportunities here in this group. What we will do is really review the content, look at best practices, and really look at providing you with an understanding of the resource and an opportunity to access them as well. We expect that you'll actively engage in participation. I think that's the best way for you to really get the most out of this. What we ask is that you respect everyone as an expert on themselves and their particular experience is nuanced and specific to them. We ask that you really do your very best to curb judgment and really listen to people and engage with them around the behavior and the circumstance and not get into personal back and forth because each one of us bring our own expertise and unique perspective to this opportunity. All in agreement? Here is an opportunity to say if this is not something you're comfortable doing or doesn't fit your expectation, that's fine. But if we're in agreement, we'll move right ahead. The expectation as well is at the end of each session, there's a learning application, and you will do your best to engage in that because, as I said, this is really about taking the theory and putting it into practice and getting as much out of it so you can impact the folks you serve as positively as you can. What's also a heads up is this is not a buried in treasure self-help workshop. There is a specific entity that serves in that capacity. This is not such. This is a learning community, more of a collective kind of engagement. So as we prepare for the journey, it's important for you to be reminded that change, any change, particularly change that relates to hoarding, is gradual. It's seldom going to happen overnight or instantaneously. So you have to learn to really gauge, measure, acknowledge, and be cognizant that change is going to be subtle and sometimes gradual. Steady wins the race when it comes to hoarding. Motivation fluctuates. There are going to be moments and times and days when people are on top of their game, when they're engaging with you, when you are the best thing that happened to them and they have all the energy in the world. Then there are days when you'll meet with folks and they'll say, not today. Or they'll, find other ways to just not actively engage or engage to the extent to which they should. You have to also be aware, cognizant, compassionate, thoughtful, and give grace to those folks who are experiencing those challenges. Every step matters. So even the slightest, most subtle step needs to be noticed, needs to be responded to. A lot of affirmation, a lot of support, a lot of positive reinforcement is going to be required to enhance people's capacity and internal motivation to make changes. Buried in treasure is a structured support. It's not haywire or pulling things from the sleeve. We really have a concrete, structured, comprehensive step-by-step approach. There are certainly ways to pivot and change, but it's really structured. Now, first thing we ask is for you to step into the shoes of someone who may be challenged. Think of what you bring to today's learning community. Name a strength that brought you here today. Indulge me. Just think of a single strength that brought you here today. Recovery, open to learning, compassion, openness, empathy, patience, support, desire, compassion. I love it because one of the things we'll go right ahead.
I told your dad I'm going to try to get off.
Okay. So reminder again, if folks can just mute if you're otherwise occupied, that's fine. What's important here is to recognize where you're starting, because sometimes the first time we engage with people, we have to recognize that we're dealing with someone who has some degree of strength. And if we bring that to the table, it's easy then for people to feel comfortable when they share that with you or demonstrate that with you. So why we start with asking you what strengths you're bringing is because we want you to take that approach when you work with folks to look for the strengths, ask for it. Because if you start with a position of strength and understanding that everyone brings strength, knowledge, resource, and resilience, you're starting from a place of compassion. Hopefully that makes sense. Why we initially started exercise, because we never want to just step into that realm thinking only about the challenges and problems that people have and define or view people through the lens of only the problem. Any questions there? All right. So as most of you would figure out by now, this is a strength-based approach. Very critical to start in that position. So, we want to ensure that we're setting learning goals. Because if we come into this without a clear expectation or a clear goal, we're kind of winging it. And that's oftentimes not the best approach to doing it. Because we need to start with a goal in mind, so we have a sense as to where we are. So I'm going to ask Crystal if, or matter of fact, I'm going to try to put a, there is a worksheet, a reflection journey, journal template that we ask that you use so that you can start out by actually establishing some goals for your own self. As to why you're here, what you think will work for you, what is it you're trying to get out of this learning. So hold on to that. You don't have to do it right now. What we ask is that you take that and really think about what is it you're striving to get out of this training. What do you hope to gain? What areas you want to focus on? And how do you track your progress to see where you are in terms of getting closer and closer to that goal? So that's your first resource. Remember, knowledge, skills, and resource. We start with a goal and we know where we are in relation to that goal. We're not just operating out of happenstance. Make sense? All right. So, I know everyone is saying, Earl, what actually is hoarding?
Hoarding disorder.
So, let's take the opportunity and I'm going to share with you a description of hoarding that I found to be the most tangible, the most easy to understand, the more clear and definitive. And Carolyn Rodriguez, a professor and medical doctor as well, of assistant professor of psychiatry at Stanford Medicine, I think gave one of the best description of hoarding. And I'll share that with you.
Hoarding disorder is characterized by difficulty parting with possessions, and parting with those possessions causes distress, impairment in individuals' lives. And this distress manifests in clutter that impairs living spaces. So individuals aren't, for example, able to cook in their kitchen or sleep on their beds. And the symptoms of difficulty parting with possessions and clutter aren't otherwise characterized by a comorbid medical problem. So for example, somebody who has broken their arm and can't physically remove objects from their home, that would not be characterized as hoarding disorder. And similarly, not accounted for by another psychiatric condition. So for example, individuals with obsessive compulsive disorder may have intrusive thoughts about touching items and fears about contamination. So they may also not be able to remove items from their home, but that wouldn't be characterized as hoarding disorder. Now, hoarding disorder has a prevalence of 2 to 6% in the population, and it's quite impairing for individuals. They have difficulty with, can have impairments in social relationships and work functioning, and that's where it really crosses the line between having an interest and passion for objects and crossing the line into a hoarding disorder.
Very good. I hope that speaks to really a very simple and basic representation of what hoarding is. And you can leave here at least with a perspective. I'm sorry, I should have expanded it. Nikki, next time I will make sure that the video is a full page. But I'm hoping that you were able to garner some information. One of the things that was very distinct there is the fact that hoarding is not merely the collection of stuff, right? It's not merely having a lot of stuff. And oftentimes we've heard and seen people use their own made-up description, definition of hoarding, and it oftentimes can be really insulting or negative. So it's important to have a good working definition of hoarding. And it really speaks to not just certain behaviors, underlying concerns, and it's important in order for us to have a diagnostic realm about it. We have to rule out certain other things and ensure that that kind of behavior really stands salient in the absence of other things. So we'll look specifically at how the diagnostic statistical manual describes hoarding as well. But I'm hoping that that video gives you a good perspective on hoarding. So let's look at what DSM-5 hoarding disorder, how it's described. It's really in the disorder class of obsessive compulsive and related disorders. So there's a number of characteristics and criteria for someone to meet the hoarding diagnosis. What is critical and important here is that it's about the persistent difficulty discarding or parting with stuff. And we'll look at some of those characteristics specifically. But hoarding really has some major characteristics that can't be missed. If you know what to look for, it's there, it's consistent, it's prevalent. So it's important for you to become familiar with not just the diagnostic criteria as it stands, but some key distinctions and additional features that oftentimes can help in arriving at that diagnosis or having an understanding as to what it is. Oftentimes what we find is people who are challenged with hoarding behaviors and meet those other criteria in terms of their behavior. Also, what we often see is the third-party intervention, which is those areas that are often cluttered may only be uncluttered if someone else, like a family or a friend, intervene to clear the space. So sometimes what we find is that someone consistently tries to support that person, particularly a family, and just says, well, if I clean it up and it doesn't exist in the state, the worst state, then it's not hoarding. The reality is hoarding is the behavior and the kind of psychological and emotional elements that's attached to that behavior. What makes it distinct from collecting is, unlike collectors who organize their stuff and display it, and that purpose is for other people to enjoy it and see it, hoarding is not that. It's about that impulsive acquisition of stuff and possession and lack of consistent organization. So it's seldom organized in that way. And oftentimes it's associated with difficulties, challenges with day-to-day functioning. It may be accompanied by excessive acquisition, someone consistently acquiring stuff and having a difficult time really organizing it or storing it. It really impacts that person's total way of living and oftentimes their quality of life. And we'll talk about, some element of trauma based on Iris's point. So certainly take the opportunity to get yourself familiar with the DSM criteria, but it's important to understand that we are not simply aiming to ameliorate or modify the distinct or characteristics of what is established in the diagnostic concept. We're trying to help that person find a way to live meaningfully, purposely, and as intended with their space. So it is important to recognize that some hoarding behavior don't necessarily meet clinical criteria. So what are the elements of hoarding behaviors and clutter? Difficulty discarding possessions. That's the first thing. The more people acquire, or if the acquisition of stuff is extensive and large, there is also a difficulty with discarding stuff. Whether it's spoiled, whether it's broken, whether it's not functioning, there is a major difficulty with discarding it, even if it doesn't have use or utility. And oftentimes, people hold on to those items to avoid the distress that may come with giving it up or discarding it. So you see there's a connection between holding on to the item and an emotional response, or a sense of emotional distress. What's also critical as another characteristic is that the cluttered space that results from excessive accumulation and a lack of discarding hinders use of the space as designed. What that means is if you see someone that has the kitchen that is cluttered with everything, they can't cook, they can't use the kitchen or the living room the way it should be used. Stove is covered, they may resort only to using the microwave because the stove is cluttered with stuff and it can't be used. There is distress and impairment that is associated with the conditions that that person live in. Inability to have egress, can't operate in a crisis in terms of moving around, have limited ability to sit, may not be able to sleep on their bed because the bed is covered. So there's lots of elements. But these are probably the four more critical characteristics that you will see with someone who has a significant problem with hoarding. And there's also a link to a video that really describes reason why people hoard, why people who have a hoarding disorder hang on to items. And we'll talk some more about why is that. So it's important to remember these four major characteristics of hoarding behavior and clutter. So we want to look at the background. Why does hoarding behavior and mental health really has that level of clear and definitive impact in people's lives? Where does it come from? What are some of the reasons why people hoard? What we want to remind you as well is that hoarding oftentimes can be subclinical, right? People can actually engage in behaviors that result in a tremendous amount of clutter and may not necessarily be distressing. So there's some element of subclinical presentation of the behaviors. Not every single person that collects stuff excessively meets the criteria for hoarding. It's important to know. That's why we say be very careful using the term hoarding. It is always better to say that the place is cluttered or the person has a lot of collection. We'll talk some more about the language. As you may know, the behavior of hoarding oftentimes runs in family. We see that displayed repeatedly in the same family circle. And oftentimes those experiences are clear. There's some behavior triggers. People tend to behave or respond to certain things in their lives by holding on to stuff and hoarding. Some of those triggering behaviors, we call them, are stressful or traumatic life events. So oftentimes you may see someone resort or use hoarding as a coping mechanism subsequent to a traumatic experience in their lives. Death, loss of a loved one, loss of a job, loss of a relationship. People hold on to stuff that may connect them with the person who may have gone, who they may have loved, whether it is a job, whatever that loss is, the person can hold on to every single item in a sentimental way or a way of associating with holding on to that concept, and it may result in a really impairing behavior. And thank you for sharing that, Crystal. I think someone mentioned it's hereditary. There are a lot of association with kind of a genetic predisposition, and oftentimes that results from kind of a conditioning. The way you see people cope often results in the manner in which you cope. Right? Many of us talk about, I do something just like my mother did, right? I have a perfect example of that. I behave in many ways in which my mom did. So sometimes there's a conditioning, a social conditioning. Social isolation also results as a trigger, could be a trigger. People really stuck, have no friends. They tend to hold on to things that associate with all the friends that they had. So you hear oftentimes with someone who hoard, I'm holding on to this picture, this ticket, this stub, this whatever, because it reminds me of the first concert I went to with my best friend or my first girlfriend. You know, I cut out particularly if that person may have had a public life, then, you know, people are holding on to every poster, every cutout, every newspaper, every item that are related to someone they created a relationship with that they may not be directly so. Difficulties with emotional regulation. And people are struggling with managing their emotional response to events in their lives. Sometimes hoarding is a way to cope with it. And we'll talk some more about some of those triggers and characteristics. What is important to know as well is hoarding also is accompanied by common co-occurring challenges. So oftentimes we can see people who are engaging in hoarding behavior may also have some obsessive compulsive disorder, may also have a diagnosis of that sort, or depression, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So hoarding sometimes can actually have comorbid conditions that it exists with as well. So these are just some examples of the background related to hoarding. Some of the characteristics, some of the way people respond, some of the kind of fundamental emotional or psychological response to events that oftentimes result in the behavior of hoarding. What is important to note as well is the fact that hoarding is one of the most common mental health conditions. 2 to 5% of the population experience some form of hoarding behavior. Does that shock you? Or is that something you're familiar with already? Good question, Vincent. In terms of, would it be under personality disorder? Not currently in the DSM-5. I'm glad to hear that it's not shocking to people. But it's important to understand the prevalence of hoarding in our society. Because sometimes when we are faced with supporting someone or in the realms of doing so, it may look like this is just this person, right? This is just the one person in the world that has experienced this major distressing disorder. But it's very common, more than we can give credence to. So some common types of hoarding, and it's important to recognize what we may see in the community, what we may see in our clientele, this object hoarding, where people collect, hold on to, and have difficulty discarding paper, clothing, household items, trash, food. Probably one of the most common presentations of hoarding. Then we have sentimental items that people tend to hold on to. Letters, cards, photos, keepsake. And oftentimes that is related to having lost that relationship or that connection. People tend to hold on to everything that is connected to it, particularly material stuff that results in major impairment. Animal hoarding is becoming even more common. And I'll say this, during the pandemic, we saw a greater presentation of animal hoarding and subsequent. It's often overlooked or not really associated with hoarding, but it's really looking at that excessive number of animals without proper care. When you see people have 50 cats and 40 dogs, and some of them are impaired, some of them are not fed, they're not cared for, they haven't gone to a vet in years, we really have some significant challenges in that regard. One of the newer elements or presentation of hoarding that is oftentimes overlooked. And yes, Claire, animal hoarding is oftentimes misconstrued or oftentimes not even associated with hoarding behavior. Digital hoarding is probably the most recent one. A lot of people have a large collection of digital data, emails, photos, files, and a strong reluctance to delete them. So the problem is not the amount of digital information or data that you have, is when you're struggling with deleting those that are not useful or don't have utility, and it's impairing to you because you're sitting, spending a lot of time wondering, should I get rid of this or should I get rid of that? I don't want to get rid of this old photo. This is the photo I had when I was in my peak shape. And if I lose this photo, then I'll never remember what I looked like when I could wear the bathing suit that I love. And before you know it, you're obsessing about, getting back to that shape, getting back to that high school shape and wearing that yellow dress or whatever it is. That can be just as impairing as a collection of food that has expired. So it's important to recognize that. The common presentations of hoarding. But animal hoarding in particular is one that is really taken for granted. And I think it's important, particularly with the folks we serve, to really be aware of that. So previously known as collecting, animal hoarding is a poorly understood phenomenon. That it goes beyond owning or caring for more than a typical number of pets. And it's important to know that. The Hoarding of Animals Research Consortium, which is an interdisciplinary group that is at Tufts University, really did some work on helping us define animal hoarding. So according to their definition, animal hoarding is having more than the typical number of companion animals, failing to provide even the minimal standards of nutrition, sanitation, and shelter and veterinary care, which results in neglect for those animals, denial of the inability to provide this minimal care, and persistence despite the failure in accumulating and controlling animals. So what we're talking about is really when we have people who are continuously collecting animals despite their inability to care for those animals, and there's a rationalization and a constant excuse that even if they're not at their very best, they're better off than me at being on the street. And there's lots of excuses and rationalization for those behaviors, but it doesn't change the fact that people are accumulating more animals than they can care for, and they're being neglectful in that way. It causes suffering both to the animals and to the people who are with good intentions trying to collect or save those animals. And there's lots of resources that can help support people, from your local animal protection organizations to other organizations that can support people who may be challenged by animal hoarding. So what are the impacts of hoarding? Oftentimes people who hoard because of their shame or challenge with navigating their living circumstance isolate. So you'll get a lot of your clients saying, I would love to see you next Tuesday, but I'm going to be busy, and a lot of excuses. Or you find that the clients that used to be socially engaged in the past, when hoarding becomes a major concern or is impairing, they stop having friends over, they don't go out, they may not engage as they usually do, and they become more isolated. Or they push off those scheduled yearly inspections or fail them repeatedly. And yes, Vincent, a lot of us have that. Hold on to a lot of books and every paper we've written and everything we've done in school, and before you know it, we have to rent out a room to keep all of them. And we haven't read any one of those papers in 20 years, but we're holding on to them. It's a lot of conflict with family members or loved one because of the dilapidated state of the home, or the fact that people can't access the home in a manner in which they previously did. So there could be a lot of conflict with landlords, conflict with the community, conflict with the police, animal rescue, lots of conflicts that may now take over that person's life. Financial issues, excessive accumulation of stuff leads to budgetary challenges and concerns. Health and safety risk. When the house is cluttered and stuff, it leads to vermin, it leads to rodents, it leads to lots of problems. People may have fall risk concerns, or they may have physical exposure concerns. Significant health concerns can occur. Skin conditions, upper respiratory conditions can all result from hoarding. Or, as we said, financial challenges when people start renting out storage units to accommodate their excessive collection. And before you know it, they're unable to maintain those units. Legal issues, landlord suing people, eviction, challenges of that nature can become a major problem. So the impact of hoarding is wide and expansive. So let's look at an example, because it's easy to understand all the complexity of the diagnostic criteria, the reason for hoarding, and how people hoard and what. But if we don't look at it in the frame of someone's living conditions and how they exist, it's sometimes difficult to understand where the challenge lies. So let's look at Helen. Take a moment, take in that, and for those folks who may not have access to the to see the narrative, I'll read it for you. Helen is a 55-year-old woman who describes herself as having always been a pack rat. She tends to save things just in case she'll need them later, and she's always tended to let things pile up in her home. Now she has difficulty throwing almost anything away. When junk mail comes into her home, she doesn't throw it away because she's afraid it might be important. She keeps meaning to open the envelopes and find out what's inside, but the more the pile has grown, the more overwhelmed she feels. Now, when she looks at the clutter, she feels extremely sad and fatigued and doesn't feel up to dealing with it. Is Helen's behavior a problem, in your opinion? Give me a yes or a no. Overwhelming yes. Oh, Carrie says because it's making her sad. So, it certainly sounds like it's a problem. The question is, does it meet the criteria, the standard for hoarding disorder? What do you think? Someone says yes, yes, yes. I will caution you. Simply having a lot of stuff that is a little overwhelming does not necessarily state that it meets the criteria for hoarding. Remember, we have to meet a series of criteria to designate that person as having hoarding disorder. Now, granted, many of you that may not be your role in terms of that clinical diagnostic disorder, but it's important to recognize where that person may be in terms of impairment. The only way we can have a better understanding as to where that person lies in terms of their level of impairment is to get more information. So what other information do we need to really have a good understanding as to whether or not the collection and accumulation of stuff is impairing Helen's life? What would you want to know more? Someone says, how long has she experienced this behavior? How big is the mail pile? Is she missing financial information due to not opening her mail? How much is there? Activity, health, her quality of life. Absolutely. We need to have an understanding as to how the current physical circumstance is impacting her daily living, her activities of daily living. If Helen is unable to function in the manner which she did, if her house is really a significant fire concern, a health risk, or having challenges of that sort, if Helen constantly sits there thinking about how, when, and why, and all the things that she can't do, then we're talking about a significant impairment, and we need to potentially intervene in that regard. Does that make sense? We don't want to jump to the first thing we see is, oh, it's hoarding, simply because the person is accumulating a lot of stuff. So we want to have a better understanding as to what's really going on with Helen, how much this is impacting her life, where does this stem from, what is the underlying concern, what is the emotional concern here that's leading her to respond, why is she using this particular coping mechanism to resolve that concern. The more we know, the better we can understand and then support that person in that circumstance. So we have to look at clutter and impaired relationship, because oftentimes it's about what is that collection of stuff and that extremely overwhelming level of stuff and how it's impairing the relationship the person is having in their own life, right? So what we see typically when we are serving someone who may be engaging in hoarding behavior or excessive clutter is the person is less likely to identify clear goals or participate in activity and services. So oftentimes when the person is engaged in service with her and we see hoarding behaviors or behaviors that are leading to excessive clutter, oftentimes it is hard for that person to have some clear goals as to how they want the service to impact their lives. The challenge, like to Helen's point, it's overwhelming. I don't know where to start. I don't know where to begin. I don't know how you can even help me. Or I don't even think I have a problem. You're the person that's saying I have a problem. They can pre-contemplate it, not see it as a problem. So oftentimes, even though that is happening, people can see it as it not being a problem and not impacting others. So we have oftentimes that classic response where people say, well, if my home is a problem for you, why you keep coming, right? It's not a problem for me. I'm able to operate in my space. You're the person judging me and saying I'm hoarding. So it's important to recognize that that dichotomy may be there. Now, what we find and what we've heard often is people who are trying to support and assist that person, they tend to respond in this way. They're irritated by the consumer's behavior. You can get, sometimes people who strive to help people can get confrontational because they believe that they're not taking the steps necessary to change the circumstance. They may give negative appraisals for that person. Absolutely. They may have a lot of our staff may have significant challenges assessing insight and readiness for change. How much does this person fully understand how their accumulation or excessive clutters may potentially or is currently impacting their lives and their daily living and their quality of life? And oftentimes it can result in people becoming very resistant at providing interventions. If the first time I say, hey, you need to clean up this space and it's not happening, it may make you cautious about attempting to make those inroads and those interventions again. And oftentimes it leads to staff avoiding or rejecting those clients. The person is not engaged actively in change behavior. We see people seldom visiting them or reducing the duration or the frequency of their engagement with that client. Yes, Laurie, sometimes giving that instruction, clear off the counter, and person takes one thing off and it's like, I cleared it, but it's just one thing. But we'll get into what that looks like in terms of really tangible ways of supporting people. That is more than simply saying clean it up. And oftentimes, staff who work with people who hoard has a greater propensity for burnout because of the significant comprehensive challenge of supporting people who are challenged by hoarding behaviors. So there's lots of challenges. Now we'll move beyond the break. Typically we take a break, but we'll do that as we move into the session. This is more an introductory session. So quickly, I want to look at another example and get your insights. So here we have Bill, a 40-year-old man, was referred to your clinic by the town's social services agency after they received numerous complaints from the neighbors about the conditions of Bill's property. The exterior of his house was in disrepair and old, rusting cars and non-working appliances littered his yard. Bill told us, I'm always on the lookout for a good deal. He spent most of his free time visiting flea markets, discount stores, and junkyard looking for bargains. He planned to fix up these items and then either give them as gifts to his family or sell them for profit. He couldn't recall having sold anything and had given very few gifts. Instead, the items were thrown on top of giant piles in his house. When the therapist first visited Bill's house, she had to squeeze through the side door, which was partially blocked by old furniture, and all entrances to the house were unusable. Bill was able to walk through part of his house only on a narrow path through the clutter. The house smelled like rotten food, and insects buzzed around. Many of the appliances, example the stove and refrigerator, had stopped working for years ago, and the home was too cluttered to permit access to the repairman. Is Bill's hoarding considered severe? Would you consider that condition to be a severe case of hoarding? Yep, absolutely. I'm getting that response. And Sally says, yes, it's dangerous. Now, what features of hoarding disorder would you say Bill is characterizing the most? Object collection, right? That's the presentation is really that object
Come on,
collection.
baby.
So in essence, Bill's hoarding is severe, but it is focused on excessive acquiring due to unrealistic belief about how we will use the item, right? He keeps collecting with the hope that somehow he's going to make use of them, either by gifting it or making a profit, and he never gets around to it. Classic example, this is probably the most common presentation of a severe case of hoarding disorder. So we want to look at the foundation of excessive cluttering. And our society tends to, in some ways, contribute to people using hoarding as a viable coping mechanism. Think of today, the world we live in. We live in a world of consumer collecting stuff, right? Purchasing, buying, acquiring stuff. Sometimes it helps define our feeling of status and value and feeling purposeful and feeling important. There's a tremendous increase in inexpensive stuff today. Yes, wow, Vincent said he worked with a guy very similar to Bill, and there was growling and challenging. Yes, because when the condition gets overwhelming, it's tough to know where to start. We live in a society where we increase buying and acquiring, and there's an increase in throwing stuff away, right? Think of all the things we buy with a short expiration date, or it may only be used for a specific task. We operate in a society where that is very common. And that cannot contribute to that sense of gathering stuff and throwing out stuff quickly. And it's hard to simply stop collecting stuff. I don't know about you, but a tremendous amount of people have if you look on their phone, one of the most prominent widgets on their phone is Amazon. And there's a reason for that. We operate in that world today. Yes, Laurie, we live in a disposable society, which makes it very difficult for us to resist the opportunity or resist that temptation to acquire stuff and then get rid of it and get new ones and keep moving on. And it's hard to get rid of stuff because then you associate a lot of feelings and emotions and sentimentality to it. So let's look at why people tend to save all that stuff. There is some tangible reasons for it. It's not just happenstance or guessing. So more often than not, beauty or aesthetic is one of the major reasons why people hold on to stuff or acquire stuff. This is so unique, I could never find another one. Whether it's a vase, whether it's a shoe, whether it's a dress, whether it's a car, it serves this concept of uniqueness. And oftentimes we acquire more and more unique things to give ourselves a sense of uniqueness in the world. We have an individual, nuanced purpose and value in the world if we hold on to unique things. Utility or usefulness may be intrinsic to people, right? I might need this later and I can't afford to get another one. Hence why you have 5 different scissors, 4 different tools, a toolkit that keeps expanding. How many of you have pens from every single conference you've gone to? And notebooks from every training. I'm going to use this. The small one is better than the large one. I like this color. This one, it looks like it's going to fit in my bag, and you keep gathering stuff. Happens to most of us. Sentimentality, or how sentimental something is. If I give this away, I will lose the memory forever. It is like giving away a part of me. Think of it. The first gift you were given, the memory, the significance, the emotional impact, people tend to hold on to that concept for infinitum sometimes, and that leads to excessive clutter. It's easy if you got dumped, and I'm using that kindly, in a relationship, and you love that person, and that love was not necessarily reciprocated, or it was shocking to you that the relationship ended. You start holding on to everything, right? Because you're holding on somehow with the intent that that is the way to hold on to the relationship that you lost. Think of the person, a relative or a person who passed, and you hold on to every item associated with them because you have that sentiment that if you give it away, you're losing that person. And before you know it, you develop a relationship with the object and forget the person, or forget the idea that the person and the relationship you had is more significant than whatever item you hold on to. But these are the tangible reasons why we tend to hold on to stuff. So it's important to be aware of that. When you go into someone's house and they have 15 different plates, dessert plates, and you say, why can't you just throw away 10 of them? You don't need 5 plates. You're the only person living here. And they can tell you a story about every one of those 15 plates. And you're like, well, they'll never get rid of that. Sentimental value attached to it. Important to note that. How many of you have sentimental stuff that you could have got, you should get rid of, but you hold on to? The notebooks that I still have from college, says he did. Yes. Oh, yes, of course. I have a pair of my dad's shoes that he gave to me when I was 16 years old. He's died, but 50, and that shoes could never fit me. It's always been 2 sizes larger than mine. I'm holding on to it. Because to me, that's part of my dad I can't let go of. If I do that 50 times, I will have a room full of his stuff. A jacket from high school. Absolutely. How many of us have the high school t-shirt that we can't fit into? But we're still holding on to it, and we tell ourselves, oh yes, I'm going to fit into that. As soon as I get into the gym and I change my diet, I'll fit into it, and I'll remember how, strong and great I was in high school. Oh, don't talk about the jeans. Yes, Laurie. Laurie said, I have a pair of jeans. If I could only pace myself into it, it'll be fine. These are some of the sentimental stuff that lead us to excessive clutter. So it's important for us to recognize our different relationship with stuff, right? The reason to buy things, to use it for financial value, for status, for memory, for sentiment. We purchase stuff excessively, oftentimes. And we should have good reasons to throw things away. Obsolescence, it's no use anymore. It's a single-use item. It has no function. We no longer need it. It may be deteriorating. So there are those tangible reasons, but sometimes they're not always easy to access for us to hold on to it, right? But it's important to understand the reason why people buy things, and oftentimes why they throw it away, so that when you're engaging with someone around the challenge to do so, you not only have compassion and grace, but you have a expansive understanding as to the reason behind people's actions. So you're thoughtful in your engagement with that. So quick discussion, and we can think about it. Think about your recent acquiring or discarding, right? Think about an important item you acquired over the last week. Now, don't tell me, because I don't want you to be concerned about it. But think about it. Why and how did you acquire it? Did you think a lot about it? Or was it barely thinking about it before you acquired it? You passed the store and it caught your eyes and you went in, and before you know it, your credit card is out and you're like, oh, I have 4 dresses like this, but this pink is very different than the other pinks that I have. Happens? Absolutely. It's important to think about it. How sometimes impulsive, and without a second thought, sometimes we engage in behavior, and we may be fortunate not to have that kind of behavior becoming really problematic for us. Think about an important item that you've gotten rid of over the last week at the same time. What made you make that decision? And Laurie said, I thought about it a month before buying it. Yes, we can pass that showcase a million times thinking, oh, I'm going to get that eventually. One day I'm going to get the courage to go in that store. And before you know it, you went into the store for 1 item and came out with 4. Since I'm here and they have a sale, I might as well, right? That's the rationale. But you need to have that awareness as to why these things happen. And once again, there is an opportunity for you to use this as a group discussion with clients you may serve, particularly if you do a support group or you engage with people. Really take them through those paces as to why and how, so that they have a good understanding as to what motivates them to acquire. So while you think about questions, and I want you to think about the questions that you may have, I want you to also recognize that we have survey. We'd like you to provide us some feedback. It's important during this particular learning community that we get some feedback from you so we understand what is working well, what we can change, what may be modified. It's important for us to have that kind of engagement and response with you. So take an opportunity to provide us with some feedback on your perspective about the training. And as promised before, we have a learning application. So what you learned today, we hope you put into practice. What we want you to do is try and access potentially a copy of the book if you can. You don't have to, it's not a requirement. But pay attention and write down items acquired or discarded and associated or feelings of issue. So during this week, if you can, if you're acquiring stuff, if you're working with a client who's acquiring stuff, ask them to simply note and write down the things that they've acquired over the week or discarded. So we want to have an early inventory for folks to, because you're going to use it as we move forward. So that's the homework for this week. You can do it for yourself or with your clients. Really list and do an inventory of things acquired and things discarded during this week. So our next meeting is Thursday, October 23rd. Same time, you use the same link. You're already registered. You don't have to change anything. And in wrapping up, I want to thank you. We appreciate your time and attention and participation. Today's webinar was hosted by DBHR through the Washington Healthcare Authority. We'd like to remind you once again that the slide was provided to you in the comments, and the video, the video presentation will be available to you in 2 weeks, and they will be available on FCS YouTube channel. So I want to thank you very much. There's a tremendous amount of reference that will help you really get a good sense of resources available to you. But thank you very much for your time. And I am giddy and looking forward to next meeting with you next month. We'll talk some more about, do you really have a problem? Really recognizing what the challenges are for people who hoard. We hope that today's introductory nature and really looking at hoarding as in terms of how it presents and how people are impacted by it really lends itself to a good platform for you to engage. So take good care of yourself and each other. We'll see you next month. Do your very best to make the most of the time ahead of you. Take good care.